They started asking me, "Do you have foreigners?" I told them, "No, we don't." They hit me about 20 times on the shoulders with sticks. Then they started shoving a knife into my shoulder. The knife was very thin, so they just jab it in and twist it.
Wait, to you?
To me. They asked, "Oh, who are you?" I said, we are Greek Catholics." They replied, "Greek Catholics? There is no such religion." Then the beating started. They beat my liver, beat my legs. You'd only get beaten personally like that if you didn't know a song. I think they actually had the clothes to give us. If they wanted to, they would have. But their main goal was just to make us suffer in captivity.
Hi, everyone. This is True War Crime. Today, my guest is Ihor Humeniak. He's an ordinary engineer with an extraordinary story. He spent 877 days in Russian captivity. They kept trying to break him over and over, but somehow he even managed to laugh about it sometimes. We've actually been laughing a lot off camera already. Even though our topic today is incredibly difficult, we're trying not to fall into constant sadness. Instead, we want to treat this as a past story that we can just sit down and talk about. Hi, Igor.
Hi.
Tell me, were you in the military before 2022 or were you a civilian?
I was a civilian. I just worked at the municipal enterprise.
As an engineer?
An engineer, yes. I didn't even think about war. I never considered that I could actually end up there.
So you couldn't even imagine ending up in the war, let alone in captivity?
Yeah, especially ending up in captivity.
Okay, so how did you take that step to join the armed forces?
There came a point where we felt we just had to do something. There was a suspected offensive coming from Belarus and other threats. Initially, I was stationed in Frankivsk, and then they sent us out to the Zaporizhia direction, to Huliai Poile.
So your very first direction was Zaporizhia?
Yes, we stayed in Ivano-Frankivsk for 2 months, and then we were sent to Zaporizhia.
How would you describe your participation in the war, specifically that period when you were right on the front line? Did you expect what you saw? How did you process it?
No, I really didn't expect it to be so serious. I mean, I'm not military. I had no idea what it would actually be like. The guys who had already been to war obviously navigated it better. Of course, it was just a coincidence. But after those first incoming hits, we quickly realized we had to dig really deep and cover ourselves well. Otherwise, we just wouldn't survive.
Sometimes foreigners ask me how I would describe the war. I tell everyone that it's incredibly hard to explain. You either understand it by being there and experiencing it for yourself, or if you aren't there, it's almost impossible to describe because it's mostly routine and it's highly dangerous.
You're just digging all the time. Digging. Even just to go to the toilet, you need to dig a trench so nothing hits you. You want to eat, you have to dig out a kitchen. You dig, you stand at the observation post watching to see if someone's out there. And if you didn't dig in, something flies in, and that's it.
In the movies, they show soldiers running into an attack, shooting, heavy combat, just 2 hours of pure action. But in reality, there's only a tiny bit of that action. The rest of it is just that routine.
And the shelling, man, it's relentless. They start shelling, and you realize you didn't dig in. You go to the toilet. We actually had a guy who went to the toilet area where we hadn't dug a cover yet. He just sat there and covered his head with his hand. Later, he jokes, "Good thing I at least covered myself with my hand."
Yeah, there are a lot of stories like that.
We aren't stormtroopers. If we were, it'd be different. But for us, what did we have to do? Hold the line, dig, and dig some more.
Actually, being a stormtrooper isn't about constant storming either. You don't just go in and assault endlessly.
Right, you storm a bit, and then you rest.
Exactly. You rest, and you have your routine too. You storm, and then it's back to the routine. That's why war is so hard to describe. No matter what you write down, you're always going to miss something. It's such a massive, complex reality. Tell me, under what circumstances were you actually captured?
I was at the observation post, keeping watch in case of an attack. It was a really grim gray night, pouring rain. The next tree line was only about 50 meters away. We were freezing, getting stiff in the cold. The grass was tall, and then they didn't come from the front like we expected. They flanked us from the left. There was a large gap in our line, and they slipped right through. I spotted them, got on the radio immediately, and engaged in the initial firefight. The guys who were in the positions with me had just enough time to get ready. They started fighting back, but They couldn't hold them off. I realized they were falling back.
The guys who were with you?
Yeah, the guys with me, they had to retreat. Looking back, it feels like getting captured took a long time. But in the moment, it happened fast. In that specific firefight, there were maybe 6 to 8 of them coming at me. I was in this ditch I had dug out. And suddenly they started throwing grenades from the side. It was an intense fight. They pinned me down with suppressive fire, just kept throwing grenades. And that's when I had to surrender. The rest of my guys were further away, maybe 150 meters, and they had already pulled back.
Well, if there are 8 guys coming at you alone, your chances are pretty much zero.
And they played it smart too. A drone flew in and just hovered right over us. What do you do when a drone is hovering? You stay put. You don't go out. You don't expose yourself. They used that. They looked, saw we were pinned, and realized, all right, we can move in. And that was it.
So they coordinated it really well in that moment.
Plus, the weather, it was such a miserable gray night with constant rain. They were practically stepping on my heels. You can imagine what it's like standing in the freezing rain. The trenches were just full of water. Later, they even laughed about it. They told us they were waiting, so we came.
I want to remind you that you can support our project, and it's actually very easy to do. Just leave a comment under this video, tell us what stood out to you, and we'll gladly discuss it in the next episodes. So, speaking of the ones who captured you, what was their attitude like right from the start?
They didn't hold me there for very long. It all happened incredibly fast. They grabbed me, stripped off my gear. I had a raincoat on. They took my body armor because they didn't have enough of their own. I had already dropped my rifle in the trench pot, so they didn't get that. At first, they actually wanted to shoot me. But then a command came over their radio, "Take him prisoner, brother." And that was it. They rushed me through to their positions and blindfolded me. And I got hit in the head twice with a sledgehammer because they started demanding, "Do you have foreigners?" I told them, "No, we don't." Then they asked, "Where is your equipment?" I said, we don't have anything." So they hit me twice with the sledgehammer, and then they threw a severed head at me. It was one of their own guys. I was blindfolded, but I could feel it. I felt the hair. They just casually said, "He was annoying us, so we slaughtered him."
Wait, it was an actual human head?
Yeah, I felt the hair. That was the moment I just grabbed the bars and thought, this is it. This is an absolute nightmare. They took my phones, started asking about the price. "How much does this cost?" I told them it was about 20,000 hryvnias. They were shocked. I told them I had to take out a 1.5 year loan just to buy it, and they couldn't believe it. They pocketed the phones. I had a consecrated icon of the Mother of God from Montenegro. They took that too. But surprisingly, they gave me back my cross. Then they threw me into a KAMAZ truck, threatening me with sexual violence, telling me what their battalion commander was going to do to me. From the KAMAZ, they moved me into a Bukanka van. Inside, there was a Chechen soldier and another guy who claimed he was from Ternopil. The Chechen just started beating the life out of me. He forced me to keep my hands raised above my head, just kept punching my face left and right, shouting about how annoying we were. That went on for maybe 20 minutes during the drive. Right after that, we arrived at their commanders for interrogation. They hit me about 20 times across the shoulders with a heavy stick, and then they started shoving a knife into my shoulder. It was a very thin blade. They just jab it in and twist it.
To you?
Yes, to me.
I know this might sound like a stupid question, but what does it actually feel like when a knife is shoved into your shoulder, besides the physical pain?
Aha. You just realize that it's over. You think, I'm not going to survive this.
So you completely understood that this might be the end, that they would just kill you?
I had just accepted it. Everything was entirely in their hands now. Then they started threatening me with pliers, saying they were going to tear my fingers off since my hands were tied. They started firing questions at me. "Who's your battalion commander? How many men? Where are your positions?" I gave them some answers, just call signs and basic things. Then they took my blindfold off and said, "Show us where your safe house is, where you guys sleep." I looked around, turned my head, and right there I saw knives covered in blood and heavy wire cutters lying around. You just knew they had been interrogating other prisoners there. I pointed out the house. Then they started asking about the battalion and brigade structure, things you could honestly just find on the internet. But yeah, that was the first real interrogation.
Were they regular military or FSB or just guards on duty?
Later on, an intelligence officer showed up. He was from Donetsk. He came in for the night interrogation and told me, "I'm Ukrainian myself, but I'm from Donetsk." Then he says, "Look, we have Kadyrovites here. If you don't say the right things, I'll hand you over to them." I will give you to them. Something along those lines.
By the way, what language did you speak with them? Did you speak Russian?
I only knew a little bit from reading Russian books, but in that moment, out of pure fear, you just go on autopilot. Suddenly you're speaking it, and in your head, you're just thinking, I can't believe this is happening.
I imagine you do, especially when a knife is being shoved into your shoulder.
But on the other hand, sometimes it was bizarre. We'd be talking, and I'd use a specific word that to us is Russian, and they wouldn't understand it. Honestly, half the time, I didn't even know if the word actually existed in their language.
Yeah, during that first period, what other tortures did they put you through?
The night interrogation was much harder. That intelligence officer came back. They really love using the field telephone, shocking you with electricity. And they attach wires to my fingers and crank the dial. Sometimes they joked they were calling Zelensky. That's what they like to call it. Then they started hitting my nails with the butt of a pistol. They'd fire the gun right over my head. Things like that.
Did they put you through mock executions?
Yes, they'd say, all right, that's it. Face the wall. You aren't telling the truth. And then they just shoot the wall right next to your head.
What do you think saved you in that situation? Why didn't they just kill you and instead decided to send you to a prison?
Just my opinion. But they were locals. They might have been planning a field exchange right then and there, trying to trade me for one of their own. They kept asking if I had been in Mariupol. I think they had some captured Marines in mind and they wanted a quick trade because I highly doubt I gave them any valuable information. We had been based in that area for almost half a year, and by then they had already studied us. They already knew who was where and how we operated.
By the way, the guys from your unit, the ones who couldn't fight them off when you were captured, did you ever communicate with them after you returned? What did they say about how it all went down?
I'll tell you what I thought at first. What the Russians told me, they had killed everyone. Then a month later in the Berdyansk detention center, they told me it was on the news, that the entire 102nd Brigade was completely wiped out. So I sat there for 2.5 years thinking, when I finally get home, there won't be anyone left. I thought I'd just be walking through cemeteries, looking for where this guy or that guy was buried. But when I finally got back and talked with my relatives, I found out the truth. Everyone from our unit had been calling them. It turned out we only lost one guy that night, a young kid who just wasn't lucky. The rest of the guys pulled back, regrouped, and fought back. Support arrived, and they repelled the attack. Honestly, I'm amazed they managed to get ready so fast. Half of them had been sleeping or resting, but they pulled it together.
Probably fear and adrenaline.
Yeah, I talked to the guys about it later. I asked them, what happened? They were about 150 meters away during the fight. The Russians weren't just in the trench, they were standing up top. In that moment, I just thought, they're going to start throwing grenades, and it's over. But later, when I finally saw my guys again, they told me someone had a gut feeling that something was wrong. They said, we got ready so quickly, engaged, and started pulling back. We honestly thought you were dead. We heard the explosions and thought it was an incoming artillery strike. I had to tell them. There was no artillery strike. That was just them throwing grenades at me.
So they really thought you had been killed?
Yes, they thought I died. But then, 10 months later, my mom got a message from the Red Cross confirming I was in captivity. That was actually the only piece of information that ever came through from them, just that message, and maybe 1 or 2 photos.
After you were captured, where did they take you? Were you in Berdyansk, Orlivka, or Kirovsky?
First, they took me to the Berdyansk detention center, the CISO. That's where they held people who were being filtered by the Russian authorities. Mostly civilians or former military. I got there right around the holidays. I was captured on December 28th, 2022. I remember sitting there on New Year's Eve up until 10 p.m. You could just hear someone screaming as they used the field telephone, the tapik, to shock them. It was the FSB doing the interrogations. And it was exactly the same on Christmas, their Christmas, on the evening of the 6th or 7th. Right at 5 o'clock, they would come in and start. They just loved using that electricity on people all evening. There were even women there, women who were arrested just for holding a prayer gathering or for calling their relatives back in Ukraine.
Wait, they used electricity on the women too?
Yes, they did, and they loved pouring water on them to make the shocks worse.
What about the priests? I heard there were priests held there.
Yes, there were 2 priests held with me. They tortured them with the electricity too. Everything was exactly the same, no exceptions.
So it made no difference, man, woman, priest, they didn't care?
None at all. I remember this one case. We heard an elderly woman walking down the hall. Her son had served in the Ukrainian military years ago, and he had managed to run away and hide from them. You could tell by her voice that she was very old. Just to terrify her, they put a balaclava backward over her head so she couldn't see anything as she walked down the corridor. We could hear her in the hallway pleading, "Why did you put this on my head? Do you want me to die? I'm so afraid." And that was it. They took her away. We knew what happened. They absolutely tortured her, because they tortured everyone there.
And what were the priests tortured for?
Just for holding a prayer service and for being of the wrong faith according to the gods.
What faith were they?
They were Greek Catholics and the guards were Orthodox. The guards would always tell us that the only true faith is Orthodox. They claimed Greek Catholicism isn't even a real religion.
Well, to them at least.
Exactly. It didn't matter if we were in Orsk and Kirovsky, in Horlivka or Berdyansk. They'd just say, no, nope, no Greek Catholics here. To them, that faith simply does not exist.
And they tortured the priests specifically for that?
Yes.
Did they torture them more than the rest of you or less?
Once we were moved to Horlivka, the priests definitely got it worse. We were stuck in the hole there for 14 days. You'd have to run down this long corridor, then stand spread out against the wall, what they called the star position. A guard would come by and just start hitting your liver, shout, "You bastards." Then they'd specifically ask the priests, "Who are you? What is the true faith?" The priest would answer, "We are Greek Catholics." And the guard would say, "Greco, Greek Catholics, there is no such faith." And then the beating would start. They'd strike them in the liver over and over. One of the priests actually collapsed from the pain. They just yanked him back up, mocking him for being an old man. He was older, born around 1965, but they just kept beating him anyway.
They just kept beating him?
Yeah. Over those 14 days in the hole, they definitely took the brunt of it.
What exactly is the hole?
Whenever you get transferred from one prison to another, they put you in isolation for 14 days. Officially, it's to check if you brought any diseases with you, but really, it's to break you in. They use those 14 days to teach you their rules and how to behave in their prison.
I see. So it's like an internal quarantine.
Yes, exactly. You sit there for 14 days and they teach you how to report correctly, how to scrub the cell. They'd force us to learn new songs because every prison had its own specific repertoire. Or you'd be cleaning while being forced to sing the Russian national anthem. Over the 800-something days I was there, we must have sung that anthem 10,000 times. And through all of this, the priests suffered so much for their faith. The guards would yell at them, "You are the ones agitating Ukrainians. You're telling the children to go fight against us. You give them your blessing to do it." They completely blamed the priest for facilitating the war.
And how did the priests themselves handle this from their perspective? What did they say about it? I mean, did they see it as just part of their path, or how did they process it?
They just saw it as their cross to bear. There was nothing they could do, so they had to get used to it. What else could you do?
Essentially like martyrs.
Yeah, they would say, we suffer this for our faith and for Ukraine.
Which must have been a double trigger for the Russians.
They did the same thing to me. They asked, "Greek Catholic?" I said, "Yes." Then they asked, "Do you know the Lord's Prayer?" I told them I did, but I recited it our way. They immediately snapped, "No, that's not the prayer. You're reading it wrong, but don't worry. You'll learn it the right way now."
By the way, I wanted to ask you about Orsk. Ukrainians often call the Russians orcs because of the sheer brutality of this war. So the name of the city, Orsk, sounds almost like a dark joke to us. When you finally found out you were being held in Orsk, how did you react?
Well, at first we were just riding in the transport. We had no idea where we were going because they kept everything hidden. They'd cut the names off the prison tags or stamp over the markings on the bed sheets. You arrive and you have absolutely no idea where you are. But then one day, we found a random book that had a stamp in it, Orsk CISO number 2.
So they didn't even tell you where you had arrived? You just ended up there completely blind?
We had to piece it together. We were on a train for almost 3 days. At one of the stops, they announced Orsk over the station speakers, and some of the guys overheard it. So by the time we actually arrived, a few of us had already guessed. It's a closed cell system, but whenever they let us out for weighing or to see a doctor, we'd whisper to the other guys in passing, "We're in Orsk." If we hadn't done that, we never would have known.
Could you tell if the prison was inside the city limits or somewhere outside?
It had to be close to the station. After the train stopped, we arrived almost immediately. They unloaded us in maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
So it was definitely somewhere within the city limits. Did you have a window to look out of?
There was a small window, but the glass was completely covered in thick white paint. Besides, our cell only faced the prison kitchen. We could vaguely see the shadows of people in there cooking.
So you just constantly smelled the food?
Yes, but in a way that actually became our clock. During those first few days, we had no idea what time it was or when they would feed us. We were completely disoriented. But then the kitchen became our reference point. We learned the schedule of the smells. There was a huge exhaust fan. When it started buzzing, we knew they were cooking. When it stopped, we knew food was coming. At night, the fan would kick on again to prep for the next day. So you slowly figured out the approximate time. When the boredom became crushing, when there was absolutely nothing to do, I started calculating. I figured out it took exactly 30 steps to walk in a circle around the cell. I'd count to myself. 30 steps is roughly 30 seconds. So I just walked in circles and counted. 30 laps around the cell, that's about 9 minutes. Keep going, and that's 15 minutes. It gave me a way to track the passage of time. You'd listen to the fan pace the floor and think to yourself, all right, it must be around this time of day.
Because there's no clock, you had to determine the time yourself just to figure out when mealtime would be. By the way, was the intake process harsh when you arrived in Orsk?
Actually, no. For me, the hardest intake was in Horlivka.
And the irony is, Gorlivka is an occupied part of Ukraine.
A lot of those guards used to work there. Some had even served in the Ukrainian National Guard or the armed forces in the past, but they hated us for a very specific reason. They listened to our radio stations and they were tracking the US dollar exchange rate. One of them came in and said, "You guys used to have such good Chernihievsky beer and sausage. We don't have any of that here anymore." Or a younger guard would come in and complain, "Your cars are so cheap now. Over here, a car costs 1 million rubles. I don't know how we're supposed to survive." Meanwhile, their salary was only about 50,000 rubles.
And they took that anger out on you?
Yes, they would literally shout, "I'm beating millionaires." No, they were so resentful. They just beat us and scream, "I'm beating millionaires, you bastards." I was just in shock. It was completely surreal.
Right. Okay, let's go back to Orsk. What was your daily routine like? How did you spend your days there?
The first 2 months were agonizing. You aren't allowed to sit. You just have to stand all day. It wasn't like that in the previous prison when we were in Kirovsky. We at least had benches. You could sit for a bit or walk in a circle, but in Orsk, you're in a tiny room and you have to stand the entire time. Your back hurts, your legs are throbbing, you can't sit down, and you wouldn't dare try because there was constant video surveillance in the cell.
Were you allowed to talk among yourselves?
We could. They didn't explicitly forbid it, but you always felt that something was off. They were constantly watching our reactions. They would deliberately mess with our food. For example, they'd hand out the bread, and one piece would be noticeably bigger than the other. Then they'd just watch us. They wanted to see if we would argue or fight over it. At first, we tried to play their game. I called it the lottery. One guy gets the bigger piece in the morning, someone else gets it at lunch, and we rotate in the evening. But eventually the luck would run out. You might get the small piece for a long stretch of time. You'd sit there for a week or two, starving, thinking, "Why am I so unlucky?" We tried switching days, but then other guys would get upset. Finally, we just said, "Let's share everything equally." We started measuring the portions. We didn't have a ruler, obviously, so we used a spoon. We weren't allowed forks. If you had a fork, they'd probably stab you in the shoulder with it. So we used a spoon to measure the bread, split it exactly in half, and kept the piece. Same thing with the tea. They'd pour a full cup for one guy and barely a splash for another. You just look at it and think, "Great, not enough tea for me today either."
And do you think they did this by accident or was it entirely on purpose?
I'm certain it was on purpose. They wanted to see us break.
They wanted to provoke a conflict, so we turn on each other.
There was this one guy who actually went and complained that he wasn't getting enough food. Since we sat 10 to a table, the guy serving the food would distribute the portions, and this guy complained to the guards that the server was cheating him, so the guards stepped in. And let me tell you, if you complain about the food, everyone suffers. They'd shout, "Now the whole barrack is going to pay." Because of his complaint, 100 guys had to do 1,000 squats. Or they'd use another method. They'd bring the guy a full loaf of bread and a glass of water. And while he sat there and ate it, the rest of the barrack had to do squats or push-ups until he finished.
I imagine the other guys would be pretty angry with him after that.
You'd see people completely change from one prison to another. I remember seeing this one guy, says I hadn't seen him for maybe half a year. Back in Horlivka, he was more or less stable. But by the time we got to Kirovsky, he was just gone. His mind had completely floated away. All he could think about was food. Just food, 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 eat, eat, eat. And you're looking at him thinking, what do we even do? Sometimes guys wouldn't manage to finish their meals in time. And someone would try to run out of the canteen with a piece of bread. But you can't do that. If the guards caught you trying to sneak food out, that was it. The special forces would bring in a 5-kilo bucket of raw potatoes and a whole loaf of bread, and they'd force you to eat it. And while you're forcing it down, they just beat you.
They force you to eat and beat you at the same time.
You have to eat every last bite. If you don't, it will only get worse. So guys would just stuff themselves. And immediately their stomachs would give out, severe diarrhea, stomach cramps. He'd go straight to the toilet and be stuck there for half a day. But there's only one hole, one single toilet. And the rest of the guys are just standing there waiting in line, unable to go because this one guy is so sick.
And this was all happening inside a single cell?
No, this was in the barracks. In a barrack, there could be 100 people. And for those 100 people, there's only one hole for a toilet. Maybe two, if you're lucky. And when everyone has stomach issues from the food, you could be standing in that line for an eternity.
Could you go anywhere else?
You didn't have the right. They would beat you to death if you tried. It was the same for anything. If someone tried to scratch their name into the wall just to leave a mark that they were there, and the guards found out, it was over for him. They would break every bone they could. They'd throw you in the hole for 2 weeks, and down there, they could do whatever they wanted. They'd just beat the life out of you.
Did anyone actually try to do that, or did people just know better?
Sometimes a new guy would get ideas, but the cell elder would immediately step in and say, guys, wipe it off, don't be stupid. Because the guards did regular sweeps. The prison chief in Horlivka did rounds once a week, and the inspector came through every single day. If they saw anything strictly forbidden, everyone suffered. But still, sometimes you'd get a guy who was just out of his mind with boredom, and he'd try to scratch something into the wall. And the rest of us would just think, here we go.
So everyone would be punished for that?
Everyone. Usually they punished the whole group for the mistake of one person. The only time you got punished personally was if you didn't know a song. They loved doing this. You would run into the canteen, whether it was Kirovske or Horlivka, and they'd line you up and command you to sing. You were expected to know about 40 different songs. You run in, head down, because you aren't allowed to make eye contact with the guards. You're already panicking. A guard stands right next to you, hitting your legs with a baton, screaming, no, sing, sing. And if your mind goes blank, if you mess up the lyrics or accidentally distort a Russian word, they just strike you hard, and you just have to stand there and take it.
Did they force you to learn anything else, like the history of Orsk or the history of Russia?
They gave us books to read sometimes, but mostly it was about impossible tasks. After that first month of just standing, they decided we had to do a wet cleaning every single day. You had to scrub the tile until it was squeaky clean. Then they'd tell you to wash the windowsill. The problem is there are bars right in front of it, and you're strictly forbidden from touching those bars. The windowsill is deep, maybe half a meter. It's covered in dirt. And what do you have to clean it with? Nothing. Maybe a tiny brush, like an old toothbrush. The guard would just look at you and say, do what you want, you're military, figure it out. If it's not perfectly clean, we'll beat you to death. You're standing there thinking, how is this even physically possible? I can't reach it. The guard would just sneer, wrap a towel around the stick, do whatever you want, but it better be spotless. So we'd scramble. We'd wrap up whatever rags we had, frantically trying to reach the dirt without touching the bars, terrified of getting beaten if we weren't fast enough. Like I said, they were just bored and looking for reasons to break us.
So no matter what you did, you just couldn't please them?
They would look into the cell and just invent new rules on the spot, like, while one of you cleans, the other has to recite the daily schedule out loud. And we had to do that for 16 hours a day, for an entire month. Then they decided we needed to know 8 prayers, old Russian Orthodox prayers. They'd pull you out and demand you recite them. If you hesitated, they'd just say, you don't know it, we'll beat it into you.
Did the guards even know the prayers themselves?
Some of them did. If you messed up a line or distorted a word, they'd catch it immediately and snap back at you. But the thing was, so many new captives were arriving that they had to hire a lot of new guards. We started seeing fresh faces all the time. The new guys didn't know the prayers at all, but the veteran guards definitely did.
By the way, were there regular Russian convicts in this prison too?
Yes, the regular inmates were the ones handing out our food.
Did you communicate with them somehow? Did you talk?
They didn't say anything to us. No talking. Nothing like that. But just by the way they handed out the meals, I could tell they really didn't like us. You could just see it. You'd look through the little window when they served the food. You know the soup is supposed to be thick, but they'd pour you just the watery part on purpose, just a quick splash, and that's it. And you realize that he knows exactly who he's pouring it for. Same with the tea. They do it on purpose. One guy gets a normal amount, the next gets barely a sip, maybe 10 or 50 grams when they're supposed to pour 150. So where does the rest of it go? You look over, and the guy is rolling away a completely full cauldron.
I've heard that in different prisons, the Russian inmates treat our guys differently. In some places, they were actually decent. They even tried to help or toss some extra food to our guys. But in other places, they were just as hateful as the guards.
I think the hatred came from the fact that A lot of their own guys had been sent to the front line. An inmate might have served time with someone who then got recruited to fight. Then word gets back that his friend was killed over there. So he looks at us and thinks, well, you guys killed my friend, and that's it. The hatred is locked in.
But do they ever put two and two together? Like, why the hell
No.
did his friend go to Ukraine
There
in
is
the
no
first
putting
place?
two and two together over there. You'd hear the local guards talking among themselves, saying, our guys are dying, but they are heroes. It doesn't matter how many of them die. They're just automatically heroes. In their minds, they are fighting against America, against Ukraine, against the whole world. They believe they're fighting everything, and that makes them heroes. The God himself doesn't go to the front, but to
Heroes?
him and his relatives, the ones who die are martyrs. Yes, the God won't go himself because, as he says, I guard you here, so I won't go, but they are heroes.
Speaking of the beatings for not knowing the songs, I assume they also beat people for the prayers.
They did, that's true.
At what point in all of this did you actually find a way to laugh about it?
Well, we didn't laugh much in Orsk because it was a strict cell system. But when we were in Horlivka or Kirovsky, it was different. It all depended on the fact that a real brotherhood was forming among us. For example, I ended up with guys who were incredibly supportive. Then as they started explaining the unwritten rules to me, because when a fresh prisoner arrives, he has no idea when he's allowed to raise his head, what he needs to do, or how to run into the canteen without getting hit. They gave me advice. We formed a collective, and eventually we learned to laugh together. For instance, Lapaut, someone has to make a daily report for the 1,000th time, and he has to speak in perfect Russian. If you slip up and use even one Ukrainian word, you immediately get hit over the head with a heavy set of keys. So a guy would accidentally use a Ukrainian word, and the rest of us just knew what was coming. We'd hear the loud smack of the keys, and we'd all just brace ourselves. You couldn't laugh right then because roll call was still happening, but afterward, when it was over, we'd go up to him and say, well, you really messed that up. And he'd say, I know, it just slipped out. And we'd all just laugh about it. Or take running into the canteen. We'd be sprinting inside, and the special forces are standing there with stun guns and batons. Guys are literally running out of their slippers. We'd make it inside, totally out of breath, shaking, and 10 guys are standing there missing their shoes. We'd eat as fast as we could, run back to the barrack and ask, all right, who lost their slippers? Half the guys would raise their hands, and we'd just laugh. We'd say, what? Why didn't you tie them? So we actually started tying them. We found ways to make laces. We'd poke a hole in the back of the rubber slipper, run a piece of torn fabric through it, and tie it around our ankles so they wouldn't fly off when we ran.
You know, right there, that is exactly the kind of story that demonstrates the spirit of Ukrainians. Even when they are beating you, trying to destroy you, doing everything possible to break you down, you still found a way to take it and laugh about it.
There was another case exactly like that. We had this one guy who wore a bright white winter hat, and he would always run dead last. The guys running in front of him wouldn't get hit too badly, but the same special forces guard would always spot him, mostly because of that white hat, and would constantly beat him. Finally, we told him, just trade your hat with someone. You're getting beaten because you stand out. He looked at us and said, you know what, you're right. So he swapped the hat with another guy. Later he comes back to us completely amazed and says, it worked, he doesn't beat me anymore.
And the guy who took his white hat, did they start beating him instead?
No, because they expected us to stay in our usual order. We always ran in groups of 5, and he was always the last one. When he swapped the hat, the guard just kept hitting whoever was in the back, but the new guy in the hat got ignored. It was crazy, but they were incredibly cruel in other ways, especially if someone was injured. If you had a wound, they would purposely target it. We had one guy with an Elizarov apparatus on his arm, that heavy metal brace for broken bones. The guard would deliberately beat his broken arm and tell him, you have no right to eat with that hand. He just enjoyed hitting the metal brace.
So he couldn't even use his own hand to eat?
Exactly. While those special forces were stationed there for 2 months, that guy never ate with his injured hand. He had to learn to eat with his left. And you only had minutes to eat anyway. They'd scream, come on, quick. And because of his arm, he just never had enough time to finish his food.
How much time did they actually give you to eat?
It entirely depended on the mood of the inspector and the guards. Sometimes we had exactly 2 minutes. At lunch, you'd have to serve the first course, which was basically boiling water, and eat it instantly. Then serve the second course, maybe some salad if there was any, and whatever they called meat. But there were times when we didn't even have time to finish the first course. When the special forces first arrived, they would just shout, begin food distribution. You'd barely get your plate, and they'd yell, begin eating. 2 bites in, and they'd shout, stand up, leave. And everyone just walked out hungry.
And what happens to all that leftover food? It just goes in the garbage? The whole point was just to prevent you from eating?
Yes, just to keep us hungry.
What were the actual rations like? Because when you say First course, second course, salad. It almost sounds like catering at a sanatorium.
In terms of portion sizes, Krovsky and Horlivka were somewhat better, but the catch in Horlivka was the time limit.
Exactly in Horlivka?
They gave you larger portions, but literally no time to eat them. You run in, the food is boiling hot, and they're screaming, quick, quick, come on, quick. They did it on purpose. But Orsk was a nightmare. You'd come in for breakfast expecting porridge, but you'd get maybe 2 literal spoonfuls of grain, and the rest of the bowl was just hot water.
What kind of porridge was it? Wheat?
There was actually a lot of variety. Sometimes it was rice, but you'd have to actively search for the rice in the water. Sometimes it was buckwheat or just random grain husks. In Orsk, they had different types of meals, but there was absolutely zero substance to them. At lunch, they'd pour the tea into these little aluminum cups, just plain unsweetened water, really. And the soup, again, just water.
What could it be besides water?
If you were lucky, you'd find 2 spoons of solid food in there. Maybe a piece of potato or a scrap of beet. They called it borscht, just some hot water with a little cabbage and beet thrown in with a potato. To them, that was borscht.
And the water, did it look pink or what?
Sometimes white, sometimes pink. If you were lucky and got a piece of beet, it looked red. And if there were potatoes, maybe you'd get 3 spoonfuls of mush and the rest was just water. They actually called it boiled mashed potatoes.
I see. So just a kind of liquid puree.
Yeah. You'd look at it and wonder what you were even eating. In the evenings, the standard meal was potatoes. In Holivka, they also gave us sauerkraut.
And in Orsk?
And in Orsk, the standard evening meal was fish.
What kind of fish? Was it herring or was it fried?
Boiled.
Boiled fish?
And honestly, I don't even know what kind. Blue whiting maybe. It was just a pile of bones. Literally just bones. When the new guys arrived and looked at their plates, they'd ask the guys who had been there longer, how do you even eat this? And the older guys would just say, oh, wait, soon enough you'll learn how to eat it. And it was true. And eventually the guys just started eating the bones.
A quick reminder to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode.
Later on, they started bringing us these fish cutlets.
I assume there was a catch with those too.
Now, they ground up the fish heads into them and everything else. And but there was one good thing about them, that they were salty. At least there was some salt, because otherwise they gave us absolutely zero salt. No sugar, no salt, nothing. The only time we got something different in Orsk was on holidays. May 9th, Christmas, New Year. They would give us a single spoonful of salad and say, a holiday for you. Look how kind we are. You see, we are so kind. We're giving you a treat.
I actually have a friend from the UK, and I was talking with him just yesterday. I told him I was going to be interviewing guys who survived captivity, and I asked him what he would want to know. He asked a really interesting question, and it ties exactly into what you just said about the lack of salt and sugar. He asked, did your sense of taste sharpen or change after you were released?
Now, ich say it's mostly back to normal. But let me tell you, when we were being transported to Orsk by train, they gave us a dry ration. It came with maybe 20 grams of sugar. The whole thing was supposed to be 1,000 calories. When I ate that for the first time since being captured, I actually felt full. We made tea, and we had to divide one single tea bag between 8 of us, and even then it felt so strong we couldn't sleep. But that sugar, I poured it straight into my mouth, and my eyes just went wide. I felt like a superhero. Just from that tiny bit of sugar, my brain instantly started working again. You think, wow, I actually have energy, because usually we were so physically exhausted we couldn't even handle the daily walk. You honestly didn't even want to go. You had to sprint up to the 3rd floor in Orsk just to get to the yard. You'd run up there, completely bent over, your heart tearing out of your chest. And you walk a quick circle, and then you have to sprint back down. You just stand there, catching your breath, thinking, why did we even go out?
But to answer the question, did food actually change its taste for you? Are your senses sharper now?
Oh, you feel it intensely, every little detail. You notice if something is even slightly too salty, the taste of this, the taste of that, and the smell of perfumes. That you have to remember, we washed with harsh laundry soap. if we had soap at all. If a real bar of soap somehow made its way in, we'd instantly smell it, we'd divide it up, and we could tell exactly who was washing with what kind of soap. Our sense of smell became incredibly sharp. In Orsk, because of the strict cell system, we never went out. Just a brief walk sometimes and a shower once a week. So if the female doctor walked by the cell, we didn't just hear her, we smelled her perfume. We knew immediately a woman is here, or a specific guard with his cologne. We knew exactly who was approaching. Sometimes you'd catch the scent of cologne, but everything was dead quiet. That meant the corridor guard was creeping around, listening in on us. He'd press his ear to the door to hear what we were whispering, but we could smell him standing right there. He washes his clothes with laundry powder. He uses shaving cream. We could clearly smell all of it, honestly. We could smell them coming from 100, maybe 200 meters away.
An extended version of this conversation is available on our Patreon. By subscribing, you support our project and help us translate these stories into other languages to reach a wider audience.